Hello and welcome to Hot and Heavy, the Elaine podcast. I'm your host, Shivani Desai. Today I'll be talking about Season 2, Episode 7, The Revenge. Hello everyone. Hope everyone's doing well out there. I'm doing okay. I'm fighting vacation brain right now. We are leaving for a really fun family trip up in the mountains tomorrow. And so I've just been having that sort of procrastination feeling all week, and I really want to get this done before we go, but yeah, I've just admittedly been putting this off for probably too long, the actual podcast work, everything that goes into recording each episode. But I'm here, I'm doing it, I'm going to get it done. And yeah, we're really excited to spend some time in the mountains. And it's so funny, now that I live in Colorado, we say going up to the mountains. And when I grew up in Michigan, we used to say going up north. Well, not us, because I never went up north. My family didn't do that, but all my friends certainly. It was every vacation break from school. There would be, oh, we're going up north. We have a cabin up north. So here in Colorado, it's going to the mountains, and I couldn't be more thrilled to do that. And we're going to have a good time. We have some fun outdoor adventures that we've planned, so it shall be a fun time, and I just need to get my brain in the present because I'm not there yet, but somehow my brain just keeps jumping to that break already. I am excited to dive into this episode. So the synopsis for my coffee table book for The Revenge is as follows. George quits his job after being barred from the executive toilet. He immediately regrets his decision, but when his boss won't let him come back to work, he and Elaine scheme to slip him a Mickey as revenge. Meanwhile, Jerry suspects a laundry employee stole $1,500 from him, leading Kramer to pour a bag of concrete into a washing machine as revenge. Kramer is fed up with his suicidal neighbor, Newman. This episode is written by Larry David. Before we get into each scene, it's a weak Elaine episode in the sense that she doesn't appear in the episode until at least 5 or 6 scenes in. But the stuff that she is given is pretty decent. I'll get more into that as we get to her actual scene, her only scene. But it feels like a bit of a backslide from where we were last week with the statue episode because there was just so much Elaine there and it was a lot of great Elaine stuff. But so yeah, this one feels like a little bit of a backslide, but nothing too terrible. Not as bad as her not having any kind of entertaining moments at all. So let's get into it. The first scene, and these first few scenes don't have Elaine at all, so I'm just gonna get through them so we have some context of what the episode is about. Scene 1, George's boss's office. I believe his name is Rick, and he is on the phone just being disgusting, clearly talking about some woman that he had an affair with, got it on video. That's a little notable thing he says there. And George bursts in, and he quits in a grand display of disgust. He's insulting the guy. He is just done. You can tell how incredibly pissed George is, and he quits. The next scene is in Jerry's apartment. Kramer's frustrated. He's had it with Newman and his suicide threats. I said jump. So this is the first time actually we're hearing Newman's name, and we don't see him in the episode, but as of this point, Wayne Knight was not cast as Newman. But here we are hearing about Newman, and he's introduced as Kramer's friend that lives in the building. Jerry gets his laundry ready, and Kramer wants him to take his laundry with him to fluff and fold. What a delight. Jerry doesn't want to mix our guys, but then Jerry caves and takes Kramer's laundry with him. The next scene's in the laundromat. George finds Jerry. I liked Jerry was kind of like, how did you know I was here? Kramer. It reminds me of when George all of a sudden shows up at Tim Watley's dentist practice when Jerry's there. I knew you had an appointment. So anyway, George shows up and tells Jerry the whole story. He quit. He was given a memo telling him not to use his boss's private bathroom. Everybody else uses it, and he uses it once. And this is, I think, the start of seeing George's obsession with toilets and using bathrooms and knowing which bathrooms to use. And Jerry says, what are you going to do? We move on to the next scene. And right away, when the scene opens, we see a very familiar framing of George sitting on the floor of Jerry's apartment at his coffee table. And in every Seinfeld montage, there is this scene included, and for good reason. It's such a... There's something very endearing about this scene, both in Jason Alexander's performance and Jerry Seinfeld's performance. The way George is sitting on the floor and Jerry's on the couch, they're going through what could possibly be George's next career move. So they discuss everything from a general manager of a baseball team, an announcer, like a color man, projectionist, talk show host. In those montages, we never really get past the sports announcer, color man one, but so I'd kind of forgotten about what comes after that. But yeah, the projectionist was kind of funny. And then he just leaps to talk show host, which I've had a couple of people tell me I should be a talk show host. So Jerry's kind of telling him, well, these aren't really realistic. And George realizes this could have been a huge mistake. Jerry suggests, just go back. Pretend like it never happened. You're an emotional person. People don't take you seriously. It never happened. I liked the shift in the tone there where once Jerry suggests that, it's totally something George could do. Yeah, he could pull that off. His whole life is a lie, as he said in the last episode or a few episodes ago. So the next scene, we move on to the staff meeting on Monday morning. George walks in, a little trepidatious. You can tell he's not sure how this is going to go. And right away, one of his coworkers, Linda, I believe her name is, she asks, what are you doing here? I thought you quit. So the woman who plays, and I'm sorry, her name is Glenda, not Linda, is an actress named Patrika Darbo. And right away, she's just so recognizable. I saw her, and not only do I know she comes up later in Seinfeld as the woman that Newman sort of flirts with by feeling her material at the mailbox. So I recognized her from there, and I was like, she's just one of those actresses you've seen in multiple things. And yeah, looking at her IMDb, she has done a ton of work. And one thing I definitely recognized her from, because my husband and I, we get into these streaks where we love watching like 90s suspense movies like The Fugitive, or this movie that Patrika Darbo was in The Line of Fire. She played the bank employee who asked a few too many questions of John Malkovich and ends up getting murdered. Spoiler alert. I apologize if you've never seen In the Line of Fire. You should. It's a really, really good movie. But yeah, I totally recognized her from that. She's great. I really like her. She's just one of those actresses has done so much work. I think she does a great job in this episode. So moving on. So Patrika Darbo as Glenda, totally recognizes that George shouldn't be there. But George is trying to blend in, and eventually the meeting starts, and sure enough, the boss sees George, pretty much throws him out. He's asking, why the hell is he there? You quit on Friday. George is trying to say, oh, you believe that? Come on. But with the words, I'll always be a winner, you'll always be a loser, George is thrown out of the meeting. So we're back to the laundromat. George is telling Jerry what happened, and he's so pissed, of course. And that's not that. Jerry just thinks that, well, this is the end of it. And no, George says, I'm going to slip him a Mickey. There was a little bit of background on what a Mickey is. It's named after someone from like the 1930s, I think. That could totally be wrong. But anyway, someone named Mickey came up with this liquid, this chemical that you put in people's drinks that will make them woozy and pass out and won't kill them, but it will definitely mess with their night. And so he's going to do that at the party, the 10-year anniversary party that the boss had mentioned at the staff meeting that we heard. So that was a little setup there. And that it's perfectly safe. Might keel over. George recruited Elaine to help. And the way he did that was he told her he doesn't recycle. And George is mainly excited because this is like something they do in the movies. How could I not do it? The next scene is in Jerry's apartment. It's pretty short. Kramer comes in. Newman jumped, but only out of the second-story window. And then Jerry realizes he's missing $1,500. We're back at the laundromat. The guy denies it, and he's not responsible. He's got that sign up. So finally, we get to the bar scene. Elaine has arrived. At 13 minutes, 21 seconds, we finally see Elaine. And we kind of bounce back and forth from the bar to the laundromat, both these revenge scenarios in tandem. So I think that was a really nice way to do it, kind of bounce back between the two with what Kramer does at the laundromat and what George is going to do to his boss. So I really liked that kind of opening shot of both Elaine and George. They're both eating appetizers from the same plate, and they're giddy. I mean, they think this is so cool. And Elaine even says, this is the kind of thing they do in the movies. And George, oh my gosh, he couldn't be more excited. That's exactly what I told Jerry. Oh, he's never felt more alive. I love just that punctuation of their feeling so good with just the way they're chewing, just with such fervor. And it's so well done physically. Then we bounce back to the laundromat. They're just arriving. Kramer explains that he's just going to pour some concrete in the washer. It'll be a solid block at the end of the cycle. Back to the bar, George tells Elaine, okay, here's the plan. You start flirting with him, and while he's distracted, I'll slip him the Mickey. So Elaine makes her way over to the boss, sits right next to him, and tries to get his attention. And I do like that she's not successful at first. She bumps into him. He kind of gives her a glance, not into it. She sneezes and steals his napkin to blow her nose very loudly. And he says, bless you, after she sneezes. So she thanks him. And she says, you notice people don't say God bless you anymore. So I am saying, I do not mess around when I say thank you. And she just gives him this very enthusiastic, but very almost creepy, thank you. He's so annoyed at her. He just doesn't want anything to do with her. Then she gets an idea. She says, go to a nudist colony next week. Oh, yes. This will get his attention. Oh, it just helps me unwind. And she then starts talking about how it's hard to get used to wearing clothes after that. So I'll just lock my office door and sit naked at work. Oh, and I mean, his interest is piqued. She works naked a couple hours a day. She cooks naked. She cleans naked. She drives naked. The boss asks, who are you? And I love Elaine's response. You don't want to know, mister. I'm trouble. Big trouble. But while this is happening, George is trying to get on the other side of the boss, but Glenda kind of foils that by sitting in that same stool that George needs to be in to successfully slip the Mickey into the drink. And we're back to the laundromat. Kramer's just making a huge mess. I just want to mention the sheer talent of Michael Richards through physical comedy. I mean, this scene is a huge display of that, and that's not easy. You know he's getting hurt doing this stuff, but as I've read about Michael Richards, he does not shy away from injuring himself in order to get a laugh. So clearly he's doing that in this scene. I mean, concrete's going everywhere, into his face, his eyes, he's falling down. So as we see kind of in tandem, again, these parallel revenge scenarios, both Jerry and Elaine are tasked with the distraction part, and George and Kramer are the ones actually committing the act of revenge. So we're back to the bar. George threatens Glenda with pulling off the wig if she doesn't leave that stool. That scares her enough. She gets off. As soon as he sits down, Elaine has to kind of take it up a notch, right? She can't just keep talking about being naked. So she goes into, no, I don't have a phone. I don't even really have an apartment. I just sleep around. Oh, oops. And the boss is Rick is just getting more and more into this. He's so excited that she just seems to be this free-spirited woman that, of course, he probably plans on taking advantage of later. And, well, Elaine does say, I mean, I just have a few drinks and let the guy do whatever he wants. It's so gross. It's so disturbing to say. But again, this is a tactic to keep his interest smack dab on her. And right as George is about to pour that Mickey into his drink, she says, close your eyes. I want to tell you a secret about my bra. So he does it, of course. He's pretty much putty in her hands at this point. Putty. George slips him the Mickey, and then the boss notices George. Oh, he's feeling good. He's giddy because he's met this woman who's basically throwing herself at him, and that good mood just kind of gets him to say to George, you know what? I think we should have you back. I want to hire you back, and you can use my bathroom anytime you want. Well, that makes George nervous because he's about to make a toast. Oh gosh, now he's got his job back. Does he want to poison his boss? Probably not. But in the toast, basically Rick just insults George the entire time. He welcomes him back, but calls him shrimpy and talks about how he blew this McConnell deal. And so George doesn't feel too guilty and says, drink up. So the purpose of this scene is to see the revenge of both Jerry for losing his $1,500 that he thinks the laundromat employee took, and for George. He needs to get revenge on this boss for being so awful to him. My overall take of both these scenes, I like it. I mean, this is really the only Elaine scene, even though she is technically in the next scene, but I love that while, okay, she really only has one scene of substance, it's full of great moments for Julia Louis-Dreyfus to sink her teeth into. And I'll get more into that with the extras later. But watching this, and this is not an episode, I'll admit, this is not an episode I've watched very much. It's definitely not one I go back to very often. But when I went into watching the episode for the podcast, I knew in general what it was about. I was like, I know I've seen this maybe a few times, but I was pleasantly surprised to see that even though Elaine didn't have a lot of screen time, the screen time she did have was pretty high quality comedy. And this is also a great display that as written, it's not laugh-a-minute dialogue from Elaine, but it's all in the performance. And again, with everything that I've mentioned before about JLD and the way she just acts with her whole body. And this was a full display of that from the beginning, just kind of standing with George and eating that food. And I mean, she's eating food excitedly, and so is he. And it's because they're both so giddy that they're doing something that would be in the movies. Even when she is sitting with Rick and trying to get his attention, you know, her way to get his attention at first is a little bit silly, a little bit offbeat with the sneeze and trying to talk to him about saying thank you. And then you just see it. You see her kind of look around and kind of tap the bar a little bit. And then you very clearly see that moment where she's like, oh, I know what I have to say. Nudist colony. And this is just further evidence where JLD is given material and she takes it from maybe a level 5 as written to a level 1000 with her performance. Love it. So the last scene of the episode is, well, George is back on the floor. This is career discussion number 2. And now Elaine has joined Jerry on the couch as an advice giver. It's almost like seeing a little kid with mom and dad on the couch having a talk with him. And he brings up, well, I like history. Maybe I could be a professor. And Elaine says, well, to teach something, you need to know a lot about it. And I think you need a degree. So, and the dynamic, both with when it was just George on the floor and Jerry on the couch, and also with Elaine in this last scene, I love this tone of, it's just so innocent. The way George is mentioning these careers, it's with this innocent quality and so earnest. He's really thinking, no, I could do these things, right? How do I get started? And both Jerry and Elaine in the respective scenes, they're very gently telling him these are really stupid ideas. But I like the dynamic and the choice to make it this very parental or like taking care of your friend kind of energy. And it just really works for me. And we need to resolve everything else in the episode. Kramer brings in the $1,500. It was in his laundry. And Jerry says, well, I guess we should use this money to repair the machine that they destroyed. We hear Newman's voice. Well, it's Larry David's voice. He's on the roof again, and Kramer is shouting at him through the window. And then Jerry sort of commands Elaine to come with him to the laundromat. I got to pay this guy. And Elaine just goes without any comment. He just tells her to come with him, and she just stands up and goes with him. I don't know. I know that they want to have that solo George scene where everyone leaves him behind and he's just sitting there contemplating his future. But I still thought it was a little odd that Elaine wouldn't have something to say, or it was awkward. Okay, so let's take a quick break, and I'll see you on the other side.
He did what?
He felt my material.
What a creep!
No. It was totally consensual, believe me. Emphasis on the sensual. Do you ever wish the material of your clothes was as soft and luxurious as your allure? Well, you're in luck. From the makers of chic shoulder pads comes a line of velvet suits that will make you irresistible. Ensconce yourself in velvet and confidence with Velvet Vixen suits. Each suit is tailor-made to hug your curves with structure and elegance. These suits come in multiple shades with a variety of squiggly line embellishments. It's our mission at Velvet Vixen Suits to make it socially acceptable to drape yourself in velvet anytime, anywhere. So if you want to become a Velvet Vixen, visit any Ross's clothing store to find the perfect suit for you. Ask for Evan Fain, our exclusive Velvet Vixen consultant. He will take extra good care of you. So what are you waiting for? Give your special someone a treat between their thumb and forefinger when you show up wearing a Velvet Vixen suit. Velvet Vixen Suits. Because why should couches get all the fun? And we're back. All right, so there was a really great treat on the extras for this episode. The commentary. Jason Alexander, Michael Richards, and Julia Louis-Dreyfus do the commentary for this episode. It was so great. It's been a while. I think there hasn't been commentary on an episode since the stakeout, so this was a treat. Right away, Julia Louis-Dreyfus comments on how Jerry's outfit in this opening stand-up routine is terrible. Oh, this isn't a good look for Jer, she says, like right off the bat. It's a mock turtleneck with a jacket. Now, Jerry loved the mock turtlenecks. I remember this, and I remember when mock turtlenecks were a thing. And I was like, what is this? Why can't it just be a full turtleneck or just a crew neck? Like the mock turtleneck length up your neck was very, very unflattering on everyone. So I agree with JLD here. Not a fan of the mock turtleneck in general, but this mock turtleneck jacket combination, not cool. And also JLD mentioned that she hadn't seen this episode, The Revenge, since it aired. And at that point, she said it was about 13 years since she had seen that episode. And moving on, Jason Alexander points out that Julie Louis-Dreyfus very much understands where this storyline comes from. And so then she tells the story about how this main storyline of George quitting is based on Larry David's experience at Saturday Night Live. He went into an executive producer's office and quit the show, as she says, in a hailstorm. And then he quickly realized that he sort of needed the job and went back to the office as if he didn't quit. In fact, Kenny Kramer, who was his neighbor at the time, told him to do that. He gave him that advice, the advice that Jerry gives George in the episode. He says, just go back and pretend it didn't happen, or just say you were joking. Now, while it doesn't work for George, it worked for Larry David on SNL, so he actually finished out that season as a writer, and he was only there for one season, but this was all based on a real experience with Larry David and his frustration with SNL about how nothing he wrote would get on the air except for one sketch that aired 5 minutes to 1 in the morning. Michael Richards comments on the shirt he was wearing in the episode in the beginning and said, I used to pick those up for like $10-15 a pop at like vintage stores or secondhand stores. And now those types of shirts are like $150. And Julia Louis-Dreyfus says that, Michael, Kramer's clothes are standing the test of time and the rest of ours aren't. And I think she was right about that. Kramer's outfits seemed quirky then, but now they almost seem mainstream. And those shirts, certainly, those button-up kind of square boxy shirts I see them all the time. When the scene came up with George sitting on the floor and Jerry talking to him on the couch about his career, Jason Alexander says, I think this is my favorite scene I ever did with Jerry Seinfeld. And Julie Louis-Dreyfus said that she was, to be frank, very jealous she wasn't in that scene. She mentions also it's just such a fabulous scene. And it's got such a sweet quality to it. And when she said that, I think that was the word I was looking for when I watched that interaction between George and Jerry. Because you don't see it too often, especially as the series continues on. It's a bit more with an acid tongue back and forth. But this was a very sweet moment and scene with both of them where he's really trying to take care of George's feelings here. And George is just, he's just making suggestions. He doesn't think there's anything wrong with it. And he's so, like I said earlier, he's just so innocent in the way he's making these declarations of what he'd be good at. And then once Jerry shoots him down, it's like, oh yeah. In the scene in the laundromat where George is talking about slipping his boss the Mickey, he says, yeah, I recruited Elaine to be part of this. And he says the whole recycling thing, that's how I got her to do it. Julia Louis-Dreyfus was very quick to say, oh, see, this is when Elaine was very self-righteous about recycling and smoking and fur and the tuna. She kind of was a cute moment. She said, although she's like, the dolphin thing is bad, but you shouldn't eat tuna now either because it's full of mercury. And she says, guys, don't eat tuna. Michael, don't eat tuna. And he says, well, I just ate a bunch before we sat down to do this. And she said, oh, that was a big mistake. It's a cute little moment between them. So when we get to the bar scene, right away, Julia Louis-Dreyfus says, oh, that suit. She says it's a Cacharel suit, which apparently was pretty good back then. It was amazing the way she just jumped on that and said, oh, it's a Cacharel suit. And she really liked it. And wow, Jason Alexander and Michael Richards, both of them comment on how amazing Julia looks in that suit. I mean, they're sort of beside themselves. You look great. That's a great color on you. Julia, you look wonderful in that suit. They really liked the suit. And Jason Alexander and JLD, they talk about how this was their first scene or first moment together in the series, kind of teaming up. And I thought that was sweet that they recognized that, but also they were very excited to work together in that capacity. And I'll go on about that in the Inside Look, something that Julia Louis-Dreyfus says about that. But they definitely said, oh, this was like the first time we actually had our own moment together. So when we get further into the bar scene, when she's talking to Rick and flirting with him and kind of saying all this kind of outrageous stuff about being naked, Jason Alexander says, it's amazing to me, Julia, when I remember you're a girl. You were so one of the guys. You could dish it out. You could take it. And then I remember, oh, wait, you've got breasts. Julia Louis-Dreyfus really laughs at that comment. No, I don't think they're really good friends, and they're just worked together for so long. At first, I kind of cringed at that, but look, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and judge what he should say to her, given that they have a deeper relationship that than I could understand. But yeah, it was very much this comment. And there's another comment coming up in the notes about nothing portion where he says something very similar to what I just quoted. I've talked about this whole concept of the writers eventually being told to write Elaine as a guy. So there isn't this boundary that they have to be within because she's a woman. So I think it was a great way to open up their minds, because up until then, women were written with very typical tropes of women in sitcoms. So it really did free them up. And I think what ultimately his comment is talking about is just how talented Julia Louis-Dreyfus is to take dialogue that is, love it or hate it, is intended to be kind of maybe more male-driven and make it her own. She could have performed that whole nudist colony, Naked in My Office run with a very, I guess, typical, oh, I'm trying to be sexy and, oh, maybe move her body in kind of like a typical sexy way. But she does it almost like counter to that. She's just very matter of fact. And it's more of a confident sexiness versus a stereotypical sensuality that I think you see a lot of times. And it works. And it works for the Elaine character. And I think that's what's so brilliant, because I've seen Julia Louis-Dreyfus play different characters where she does do that, and it's still brilliant, but it wouldn't have been right for Elaine. So her shaping how Elaine would act with a subject matter of being nude and loving being naked in a way that is both sort of unexpected but very true to what she's building as the Elaine character. To me, this is really the core of why I love both Julia Louis-Dreyfus and the Elaine character and what she made of the Elaine character, because there wasn't overt sexiness too much with her. It was a confidence and even if she did try and be sexy in later episodes, it was this comedic, almost making fun of herself way. So even though Jason Alexander's comment to me at first was cringy, again, like I've said before, I try to just kind of go back into the context of both the person saying it and the time that they're saying it. It's a compliment to her, of course. And the fact that Julia Louis-Dreyfus really laughs that's all you need to know. It was a comment amongst friends, and she totally understood what he meant. In the scene where Michael Richards is just fighting with that bag of concrete, which was actual concrete, he was very insistent to make sure whatever prop he was using, he needed to feel the weight of it. Julia Louis-Dreyfus gives him a compliment, just saying, gosh, I learned so much about physical comedy just watching you. And this was a really sweet moment in the commentary where they're watching that scene and, oh my gosh, Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Jason Alexander are laughing so hard at all the physical comedy that Michael Richards is doing. And apparently in the sound booth or wherever they were recording this, he is described as what Julia Louis-Dreyfus has kind of doubled over, not watching the monitor. And she goes, God, you're so quiet. Look at him. She goes, come on, buddy. You did such a good job. It was so cute. And he just kind of, I think he's just one of those perfectionists and maybe just doesn't like to watch himself, but it was just a cute moment. Julia Louis-Dreyfus loses it when Elaine has that line, close your eyes. I want to tell you a secret about my bra. She goes, what? That is the stupidest line ever. I thought that was really funny that she was so like, what the hell was that piece of dialogue? And finally, Jason Alexander, I like what he said at the end of the episode when they're all in the apartment. He said, always the best endings to our episodes was when all four of us were together. And I just really like that he said that because I wholeheartedly agree with that. Really quick, the inside look, Larry Charles. So this episode is based on something that Larry David actually did, but the whole bathroom portion of it was Larry Charles's idea because Larry and Jerry had their own office with their own private bathroom. And I think there was a little bit of tension about him using their bathroom. So that kind of, that informed what they did as George's reasoning to quit his job. Julia Louis-Dreyfus had a quick little snippet of an interview in the Inside Look. She said that she really loved the scene with her and Jason and that they quickly learned they had this like comedic shorthand together. And this was that first episode where they discovered that it was so easy to kind of play off of him and they played off each other so well. So I really liked that. And that is gold when you can find that. It is such a beautiful thing. So moving on to the notes about nothing, there's just a few quotes here. Jason Alexander had a quote about how Julia Louis-Dreyfus, he felt, had the hardest job of the four of them. And this is the quote from Jason Alexander. It's all guys writing the scripts, and they're not particularly adept at writing women. So Julia does a lot of taking less than ideal women's material and really running with it. The show is really about being one of the guys, and here's this adorable woman who is one of the guys. She can dish it out as well as take it. In a way, she's attractive enough to men to be interesting and yet not threatening to women. That's the end of the quote. I like this. Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it's echoing what he says in the commentary, and I've already kind of gone into that, but this is a little bit more fleshed out about his thoughts. And I wanted to talk about the comment of him saying that it's all guys writing scripts and they're not particularly adept at writing women. I like that he recognizes that Julia Louis-Dreyfus really did have to take dialogue that was not meant for a woman, as they were instructed to write her like a man, and doing what she does with it. In the Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee episode where Jerry interviews Julia Louis-Dreyfus. So if you're not familiar with that series, Jerry always matches whatever car he's driving around with his guest in. He matches that car to their personality somehow. And so I believe, I'm not going to know it, but it was basically, I think it was an Aston Martin maybe. It was a car that was in a James Bond movie, I want to say. And the reason he chose that was because she was the James Bond of comedy and she can be who she needs to be to just annihilate that script and take it to a level that no one saw coming. So I really thought that was, first of all, such an incredible compliment to her. But I think this is kind of echoing that, what Jason Alexander says about the way she really had the hardest job, because she not only had to take this dialogue and know it and do it well, but she had to do it in a way that was believable as this woman, and had to straddle a line between being this attractive woman to men, but then likable with women. So I agree with Jason Alexander there. The next quote is from Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and this is pretty consistent with other quotes that I've mentioned. And it seems like they have a lot of quotes, but it's basically just saying, again, how fortunate she feels to have been on Seinfeld. I'll kind of paraphrase here. Just how fun it was. It doesn't happen very often where everyone comes together and it just works. Usually there are little glitches. Maybe it's not well written, or you don't like the other people in the cast. But for this show, it was brilliantly written, and that's hard to come across. And we all loved each other. So she said it was a wonderful luxury for an actor, and she felt super fortunate to be a part of it. And lastly, Julia Louis-Dreyfus has a quote about Kramer. It's just kind of on this same theme of the cast members just complimenting each other. She says she knew early on that Kramer was going to be the breakout character of the show. She says, quote, "Kramer is the zaniest. In a lot of ways, he's the guy we know the least about, and he's capable of the most. If Kramer came in through the ceiling with a parachute, nobody would question it. Kramer's capable of anything, and that's what makes him exciting." Very true. Okay, let's move on to Contributor Corner. Our good old friend Greg has written in, and here are some of his thoughts. Greg says, "I felt this episode was one of the weaker ones of the series. This is solely a George episode, and his storyline with quitting his job and subsequently trying to slide right back into it would have made for a better subplot than the main story. The subplot in this is Kramer and the laundromat, which is a ridiculous premise and, while giving him some physical comedy to perform, is not worth the time spent on it." Yeah, I kind of agree. When it was bouncing back and forth between the bar and the laundromat, I was sort of tiring of the whole laundromat thing. I'm like, okay, yes, I completely appreciate Michael Richards' dedication to injuring himself in order to get a laugh. And I'm sure it was super fun for the studio audience, which they do mention in the commentary, just the audience going nuts as he's doing it, as he's, just falling all over the place. But to me, I agree. I think they spent way too much time on it. But I also think they wanted that parallel revenge storyline between each pairing of the cast. Greg goes on to say, "Elaine is wasted with only one real scene, but she delivers tenfold with what she's given. Discussing the Mickey scheme with George and subsequent execution of it are hilarious. I love how she comes off almost annoying at first in her attempts of flirting to becoming so completely over the top, ultimately winning the guy over with the nudist colony comment, and how she's sitting around naked all the time. I love how Elaine is willing to help her friends in these situations, even if the only thing she gets out of it is seeing how successful she can be at winning a guy over, even one she has zero interest in. She does this other times in the series, notably with the head of NBC, where she clearly relishes the challenge of testing her sex appeal." Wow, yes, I didn't even think about that. With Russell Dalrymple, she does the same thing. And that was even more of a little challenge because she was totally dismissed by George and Jerry, saying, well, she's not going to be able to have the cleavage to get him distracted. So that was a little more of a challenge. And wow. So just to give you guys a little bit of background, I don't read the contributor comments before I record because I like to quote Frank Costanza, I want to go in fresh. So I really do kind of read these real time so that I'm not, first of all, I don't want to be influenced by these thoughts beforehand before I kind of put together my own thoughts about the episode. But I also just like what happened right now, I like to be surprised and have a real reaction real time with it. So wow, this was great. I love how Greg really calls out that she really loves helping out her friends. And if it's about a test of her sex appeal, then yeah, she's there in a second. And also Greg and I totally agree that it's one scene, but man, she really delivers so hard on it, and it's so great. Once again, I say it all the time. I probably say too much, but JLD just nails it. You give her anything, she'll just elevate it to another level. And then Greg ends off his thoughts with the following. He says, while this episode, in my opinion, is weak overall, it contains one of my favorite Costanza moments ever, which is when he said, if you don't give up the chair, the wig is coming off. And Glenda replies, I don't wear a wig. And George starts counting and she moves immediately. Great delivery by both Jason Alexander and guest star Patrika Darbo, who is one of the biggest character actors of the 80s and 90s sitcoms. Yes, like I said earlier, gosh, I mean, if you just look at her IMDb, it's never ending. It just keeps going and going. It's amazing. Good for her. She's really worked consistently. Like I said, I mean, her performance in The Line of Fire is so good. It's a small bit part, and she's opposite one of the greatest actors of all time, John Malkovich, and she holds her own. It's fantastic. So yeah, it's so funny. Again, reading it real time. Haven't read this before. I thought he was going to talk about the scene with George and Jerry, and George talking about his next job. But wow, that's a very specific part that I didn't even remember was in this episode until I had to rewatch it for the podcast. So wow, okay. Greg loves that wig moment, and it is really funny. Just her face when he starts counting is priceless. Thank you so much, Greg. Again, really great comments. I always look forward to what Greg has to say. And if you want to become a contributor, please email me at elainepodcast@gmail.com. Again, elainepodcast@gmail.com. And you could have your thoughts read on the podcast as well. Or you can send in an audio clip. We've done that before. However you want to share your thoughts on a Seinfeld episode, email me and you'll get all the information you need. Okay, so my favorite Elaine moments, well, I think it's just the whole interaction with George's boss. Everything was great. If I were to pick within that, if I were to pick a favorite moment, I think it is that moment, like I talked about earlier, the little shift in energy when she realizes, I know exactly what I'm going to say to this guy to get his attention, and she blurts out her nudist colony thing. That to me is a moment that when I was a little girl, those are the things I would notice. What physically she did, we can't hear her thoughts, but you can almost hear her thoughts through her actions and through her body language. And for me, that moment of, this isn't working, a little bit of frustration, to that little realization, that to me is magic. And I love seeing those moments. And Elaine, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, just nails it all the time. So favorite Elaine moments, the whole scene, so many great moments. But I think if I were to pick one moment from that scene, it's that shift in energy. It's very subtle, but once Elaine figures out, I know what I need to do, it's just delicious. And my final notes, I'm with Greg. I mean, way too little Elaine. But what they gave her was funny enough to let her just run with it and make it extremely funny material to expand upon and create so many great little moments for her to chew on. I mean, really, even if what is in the script isn't laugh out loud funny, the actor knows, okay, well, it's up to me to figure out how to make this better. And well, she does that with great aplomb in this scene. And it's her only scene. So you know JLD's back there going, well, I'm going to give him something to remember because they only gave me this one piddly scene. Everything from the thank you to just so much range and showing her comedic value. I love the giddiness at first, to the little frustration, to the really settling into this whole nudist thing, and then talking about very disturbing things like, I just drink and let the guy do what he wants. I mean, it's totally gross and not what Elaine believes, we know, but her purpose is to help her friend. And like Greg says, she loves doing that. And if it's also to show her sex appeal and get attention to help her friends, she's going to do it. And I think that's all I can say about The Revenge. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I will see you next time.